Joe Christofek and Caton Bradar joining you for another edition of Night School. And behind us, the horses are coming out for the post parade for a race here at Gulfstream Park. And Caton, this is one aspect of handicapping that I absolutely love. I'm going to do all the paper handicapping I can, but I want to see the horses on the racetrack before I make any final decisions.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and I believe the more you can see of them, the better. I also think that if you're in person, that's the ideal position to be in, but even if you're not, you can watch the horses in the walking ring and on the simulcast feeds, as well as other racing television networks that cover the feeds, and see how the horses look. It tells you a lot. Body language, general physicality, general health, and, like everything, I think first impressions are the most important.
That's very interesting because that kind of leads me into my next question. Let's talk about the difference between the paddock and the post parade and what kinds of things you're looking for in the paddock and what kind of things you're looking for in the post parade, because attitudes can change from one place to another.
Well, they definitely can, but I do think you trust your initial instincts. When a horse walks into the paddock, this used to be what I loved, to just see, without looking at the odds, without looking at anything, just glance at the horse, the number, and make an initial impression. Do they look happy? Do they look healthy? Do they look fit overall? And I would always make a little denotation right on my program with the number, a plus or a minus, or circles or stars, just to indicate that horse that maybe was a knockout looker, or a horse who I just really didn't feel like they looked all that well. Now, I won't necessarily go with that first impression over anything else. I'll continue to watch them both through the saddling process if I get to, and then definitely out on the racetrack. Sometimes a horse that looks a little iffy when they first walk into the paddock comes to life when they get out on the racetrack. That can be a really good sign. Vice versa. Sometimes a horse that looked great in the paddock comes undone out on the racetrack, and that can be a bad sign too. But you also have to know your horses pretty well, because they are creatures of habit. They have individual personalities, and sometimes they can fool you with how they're behaving and looking.
I think looks, as far as the paddock and the post parade, become more important with younger horses, maybe horses that haven't raced all that much, especially with the 2-year-olds, although a lot of the 2-year-olds do look good because they don't have a lot of mileage on them. But with some of your younger horses, you want to see kind of where their head's at. With some of these horses that have been to the race wars 70 times, it's not quite that as important to me.
Now, I agree with you there, although every once in a while you'll see an old war horse, one of those old claiming horses that suddenly walks into the paddock and just looks better than he's ever looked before. And when you can see a horse that's run 20, 30, 40 times and they still come in looking like a young horse, well, that's a great play in my mind. So I do think you can use it for just about any category, but I agree with you as far as young horses being key. And I also think in terms of stakes races, when you get to the highest level of competition, they all tend to look really good, but there are a few that sometimes stand out.
Let's talk about the physicality of a racehorse in the aspect of sprinter versus router, maybe a turf horse. What kind of things are you looking for, maybe with a 2-year-old, where you're in the paddock and you're saying, this horse looks like this horse is ready to go as far as the sprint goes, and maybe this horse needs a race or two because they're built like a different type of animal, maybe a router?
Well, a sprinter, a lot of sprinters are actually really muscular, just like they're not teeny tiny horses, believe it or not. They actually have a big, strong, powerful looking shoulder. Sometimes almost a square looking shoulder is an indication that a horse has a lot of speed, natural speed. Powerful hindquarters can be an indication as well. They tend to be more short-bodied, compact built as far as speed goes too. But good horses can come in all shapes and sizes in just about every category. The one that I find the most confusing often are turf races, because the European bloodlines are very different from the North American bloodlines, so the horses body-wise can look very different. And I've seen some horses that looked a little gangly, a little long-bodied, lanky, not the most beautiful-looking horses, not the ones that you'd pick out right away, but they were killers on the grass. So, European horses come over here for races like the Arlington Million, the Breeders' Cup. They sometimes have a little bit longer hair. They sometimes just look a little bit rougher overall than some of our North American grass horses, but those looks are deceiving because they can run lights out on the grass, and that's years and actually centuries of breeding in some of those bloodlines. So I think those are the ones that can be the most deceiving and hardest to peg.
Now, as far as what a good-looking horse is, we talked about happy, healthy, shiny coat, the muscle tone. I like to see when a horse's ears kind of go back and forth, maybe a little nudge of the pony, maybe a little prance in their step, but not too prancy. What are some of the things that people can look for on the negative side?
Well, usually don't want to see a horse that gets overly excited, that seems to be fighting with their handler or fighting and resisting the lead pony out on the racetrack. Ears pinned back is generally a bad sign, a sign of discomfort or something bothering them. Horse that's constantly swishing its tail around is usually a sign it's irritated with something, or maybe something's not quite right. And of course, sweat. We talk a lot about sweat, washing out, horses that get all lathered up. You do have to know the horse, though. There are some horses that just have physiologically kind of hotter blooded nature, and they get more excited. They get a little bit sweated up beforehand. Shackelford was a great example of that. He ran his best races. He won the Preakness Stakes when he looked like a wild Mustang out on the track and got hot and was pitching and bucking and carrying on. So you do have to know the horse a little bit and the temperament. And bloodlines can give you some indications too. For example, Pulpit was a horse who did get a little nervous, but he still ran super on the racetrack despite the sweat and despite getting a little antsy. His offspring tend to run like that as well. You'll see quite a few that are a little hard to manage in the paddock, and they'll get a little hot out on the post parade, but they still can run. So knowing the bloodlines and the tendencies helps too.
Study the program. If you're at the racetrack, go to the paddock, go down by the rail, check out the horses in the post parade. If you're watching via simulcast, do the same thing. Paddock, post parade, what about warm-ups?
You know, horses can fool you, but I do like to see a horse that warms up well, that is willing to go out there and jog or gallop and go along. Sometimes you'll see them break away from the pony. Todd Pletcher's horses generally break away from the pony and warm up completely by themselves. So that shouldn't be looked at as a pro or a con. That's just normally how he does business. Sometimes when trainers instruct the jockeys to break away from the pony, they're doing so to really aggressively warm the horse up and get him geared up so that normally those horses show a little bit more speed out of the starting gate. But if the horse hasn't been getting out of the gate very well at all, that doesn't mean he's going to be on the lead, but it might mean that he's going to show just a little bit more speed and be more forwardly placed when he gets out there. But I do watch the warm-ups, but there's a big difference between the way the horse strides out in a race and the way the horse warms up with the pony in the post parade.
Most important aspect of handicapping, obviously, is knowing the horses, knowing the circuit, but an added bonus and something you can use as a weapon, knowing how the horses look in the paddock, post parade, and in the warm-ups. It's definitely an aspect that you want to pay attention to, and we're going to learn more about it in this episode of Night School.